There's an old saying, all things come to those who wait, as long as they work like hell while they're waiting. Nothing is easy, folks, if it's going to have any real reward. So if you care to, stay tuned to the next segment, part two of conversations with real people named Ken about some of what it takes to be successful.
Time they were building the Kentucky Derby Museum. I think the budget on the project was a little over 100 million. So these are not small numbers, and they're highly organized. The contractor is very regimented, and we had to fall in the line, and we
Sure.
did,
Yeah.
and we did. And at that point, that's when I went to Joe, and I had the harebrained idea. That wasn't a harebrained idea at all. It was a great idea. Joe was my age, and we're both in our late 30s, early 40s at the time, and in our prime. Uh, and I said, Joe, do you want to kind of go into business with me?
Mhm.
Because I was at that point where I knew I was to grow it. I couldn't do it by myself.
Mhm.
I had enough experience at this time after the first year that, and that's what we did. And it took him a while. Joe is a smart, hardworking, very intelligent um, guy, and grew up on a dairy farm. Uh, we had our core values are very similar, but I grew up on Long Island in the suburbs in the magnetic pull of New York City.
Yeah.
Joe grew up on a dairy farm in northern Kentucky.
Well, that's my observation generally. You see common characteristics in people from places that have nothing to do with each other. So I don't know if people are born with something or fail to be
Well,
born with something, but
we have similar core
I mean
values.
that's what I'm
That's it.
getting at.
That's just it. I mean,
I
Joe,
know people from down there in the projects who shouldn't have any of the values that I have, and I shouldn't have theirs, but some of them, not all of them, were very similar, you know.
absolutely they do. I think, and they're not hard. These are not hard values. These are human traits in a person.
Silly me, but I would say everybody should have those
Well,
values.
yeah.
But yeah.
Where would we be if we? Where would we be if if we did? I mean, and I'm not. I'm no savior. I was a small. I worked for a big company. Then I worked for myself as a small businessman. But I never felt I did it on my own. I always had somebody there. I was never a one man show. Then there was guys that can do that.
There
It's
are
not me.
just about in that. Yeah, there are people I know, people all around. They want to be a one man show, so they don't do big business. They don't cover the world. They have their own little world that they've created as a one man show.
I have a really good friend that's a
Yeah.
fabricator,
Mhm.
right? And he's like you. I mean, you're a world class woodworker, and the work in the home that we're in, a home built in the 1870s, and you completely remodeled this gorgeous home, stunning home with your two hands. All right.
Pretty much.
You have the confidence to do that.
Mhm.
I wish I had that confidence. And I've always admired guys like
Well,
you
I have the
and like
confidence.
Joe
Yeah,
and like
yeah, yeah.
Bert.
Well, I have the confidence because I've spent decades doing it. I couldn't have walked in my first day and done this. I know what I did and when I did it. I know what things weren't so hot the first time around, but as you get better, the work gets better.
Well,
Yeah.
hand me that book over there, Chip.
Okay.
Just hand me that real quick. This is
Because actually, this has been discussed in another
all right, but
podcast from another guy.
we'll
So
just
you go ahead and discuss it yourself.
well,
Available on Amazon.
this is Chip. This is Chip's home in Clifton Heights, city of Cincinnati. He's got one of the most spectacular views anywhere in the city, and this book just pretty much chronicles uh, the work that the home that Chip lives in. But if you see, this is his living room. I'll show you the room that we're sitting in now. Where is it, Chip?
Don't know. I don't have them memorized.
Oh, I want to find the table that we're sitting at.
It'll begin with those other rooms. They're all together.
All right. Well, this is the room next door. What room is this, Chip?
Well, that's the
The
living room, but
library?
that's looking up at the ceiling, so
That's
maybe
looking up
not.
at the ceiling. Look at this. How incredible. I still want to, I'm just going to find that.
You're right there somewhere. Don't go too far.
Is the
Kitchen,
kitchen?
you're getting there.
I think we're going back too far. Well, shucks.
Okay then.
Never mind. Oh, here we are. We're sitting at this table. That's Chip's dining room.
Well,
Doesn't look like my dining
light
room.
reflecting there.
How's that?
Yeah.
But this is what it looked like when
Yeah.
we started.
Buy the book, you'll get a better, be able to see it better.
Well, it's like that's inside the house, so you can imagine. But nonetheless, talented craftsmen are just something that I've always admired, and I wish I had had that, but I didn't have that.
Anybody can do it. All you have to do is spend decades learning to
Right.
do it.
Like Joe,
Yeah.
like Joe Bach, my partner, who was, you know, the, the real deal in terms of concrete. And you talked about getting a set of plans and, turning that into a finished project. I understood the plans. I could do takeoffs but I could never.
No, it's skill on its own, right? You don't just nobody just walks up and looks at a set of drawings. Okay, I can estimate this. You can't. You got to learn to
No,
do it.
well, I had my dad was an engineer,
Mhm.
and when like going back to Churchill Downs, he didn't help me estimate the costs. He helped me estimate the quantities. He'd look at these, and I remember sending FedEx them the drawings. Because
Back in the day,
back in the
before
day
the
when they had
internet, yeah, yeah.
we didn't have a computer to do a scaled takeoff,
Mhm.
which exists now. But I would get the blueprints from the architect, put them in a tube, FedEx them to my dad in New York, and then he would get out his textbooks and do all of his geometry, and then he would say, okay, this job is 7,286.375 square feet. I'm like, Dad, get me in the ballpark. I don't need anything to the right of the decimal point. But he was
Yeah,
an engineer,
yeah,
and that
yeah,
was his training.
yeah.
And he was precise. But he would always help me with the specific quantities, because at that time Joe was not full time with me yet. There wasn't an owner of the company,
Mhm.
and I could only ask Joe to help me with specific things like, let's get this job done, and that's what we did. And so I always relied on people around me that I can trust, and that would help me.
Key point: people around you that you can trust, because there's a lot of people around you that you can't trust around any of us. And
I knew, instinctively, I knew who I could trust.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. And I had total confidence in my dad.
Mm.
I had some confidence in myself that if I did the right things and I, estimated the job correctly, scheduled it correctly, had the materials there correctly when I needed them, and then I had enough guys, which was always a problem, because
Well, and I would like to point out here, skilled tradesmen, probably skilled anything, is chronically in short supply and always has been. And uh, warm bodies are available, skill, not so much.
we didn't have time for anything. We couldn't get by without guys that didn't know what they were doing. So it's one reason the company never grew. It grew to a point where after the first year, we sat down. Joe became my partner, split everything down the middle. Um, he was far better at managing the guys, and once the job started, and then I kind of stepped back.
Mhm.
And if he needed me as a laborer, I was always there.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
but having skilled, you can't. This is not knowledge that you're born with. You have to develop these skills, as
nobody's
you know.
born knowing how to do anything. Everything is learned. People forget that. But yeah, you said the limit to the growth of the business was how many good people you could find, and I think that's just always the case. I could have had a much bigger business. I even had the square footage of shop to bring in some number of
So did
more
we. We
people.
we had the
I couldn't get
capacity.
them. Yeah, yeah.
My dad would say, my dad worked for a defense contractor for his entire career as an engineer. Um, he would always say to me, because every year I would share with him the financials, and he'd look at them and say, "Okay, good, and you're making money, but you're not growing. Once we hit a certain plateau, we never grew.
Mhm.
Maybe plus or minus 10%,
Yeah.
but there wasn't anything meteoric. And you said, why don't you grow it? I said, the biggest problem is, what we do, we're in the specialty concrete business, the architectural concrete business. We are under a microscope. When we're finished, people look at this and they're dissecting it for quality. And if we don't maintain a certain level of quality, we're not gonna fail.
Mhm.
So if we grow it, beyond where we are, uh, and we have 3, 4 crews, if we don't have qualified people on every one of those crews, everyone has to be qualified, because you can't just have
Absolutely.
warm bodies in this kind of
Yeah.
work.
And I think another thought I had, people think of business like a factory, which is one aspect of a business. Lord knows I've worked in a factory where each person has their one little bit of something to do that they can learn in like 20 minutes.
Mhm.
And now when they're an expert, their little thing that they do. So stuff goes down the line. So you can expand something like that. The employees aren't going to hold you back too much because you can always hire another guy that can turn a screw or something. Uh, so that's manufacturing like gazillions of something over and over again.
Right.
And anybody, by the
Right.
time they've done it 20 times, they can probably do it the 21st time without even thinking about it. But when you're a specialty contractor, fabricator, and everything's one at a time,
Every
you
project
have
is
to
unique.
have people
You do.
who can interpret what's going on
You do.
and not just say, well, the way I always did it before was, no, what about this time? And you have to be able to see what this time requires of you. And there's so few people who can or will do that.
And this is the way I was able to, Joe and I were able to succeed and define success. I mean, we made a good living.
Mhm.
We didn't get rich, but we made a good living.
Mhm.
Took care of our families. Um, but lost my train. What we did to do that, we had a core group of guys. We were never more than 10 people, ever.
Mhm.
But what we did as a small business was we provided a living wage. Um, we provided benefits. We gave vacation.
Mhm.
We
Because you got to make that money to be able to pay that money.
You do. All right. But I figured, and my thought was, if what I knew from the previous owner, he made a comment to me one time, and I was like, it took me back big time. He made the comment, and he said, we're talking about the employees and benefits. He says, they don't need insurance. He said, what do you mean they don't need insurance? He says, they have workers' comp. And he said,
Yeah.
they have
Okay.
workers' comp? And this guy was very successful. His business was not just specialty concrete. He was into major building restoration, not like when you have a flood.
Mhm.
I'm talking about, in the city of Cincinnati, on his business card, he had Music Hall, which was built in 1872
Something like
ish.
that. Yeah. Yeah.
Started the construction in 1872. His business was restoring all the stonework and brickwork on it, which is a high skill set. But his guys were all union guys, and they all had union benefits, and we were not. And I said, how could somebody get by with
Yeah, I think a
just
union would require
he those guys did have it, but he had maybe another part of his shop where they were not union.
it. Okay.
Okay. And that's where we came in. That was the business that I acquired.
Okay.
Right. So we were never part of the union. So the guys did not have health insurance. They didn't have vacation pay. They didn't have um, dental insurance. They didn't have. There were things
They
they
got a
didn't have.
paycheck. Yeah.
They got a paycheck
Yeah.
every week.
Mhm.
They got turned in their hours and they got their hourly rate. Period.
Yeah.
That was it. And then he made that comment that they don't need insurance. They have workers' comp. I'm like,
Yeah, because workers' comp is for an injury on a job. It
exactly. It's
doesn't do
not
you any good anywhere else. Yeah.
exactly. So I made the decision very early on, and we provided health insurance to our employees and included their families.
Mhm.
Back at that point in time, it was reasonable to do because it wasn't
Right.
is incredibly as expensive as it is today.
Yep.
Okay. And over the years, that's changed only in the sense that the new owners of the company, because I sold the business, my share of the business in 2018, end of 2017, uh, they continue to maintain that, but they don't offer insurance for the families now. It's just the employees.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think that's getting to be the trend because it's become so friggin' expensive.
But what I did and what the current owners do is they pay 100% of the premium
For
for health insurance.
yeah, but for the employee.
Employees only.
Yeah.
But at this point, it's 6 or 7 times more expensive than it used to be.
Oh yeah.
Right. So they can't afford to offer it
Right.
to the employees' families, but they certainly cover their employees
Yeah.
at a 100%.
Hmm.
So who pays 100% of health insurance premiums?
I've been out of it long enough. I don't have
A lot of
clue.
people
Yeah.
don't,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
if people are listening. They know
Yeah.
if they work for a company that they contribute to some degree to their health insurance. It costs them something. My small business, employees never contributed to their health insurance. I also started something, that they didn't have, was a retirement program. Couldn't afford the 401k, but I could afford a simple IRA.
Yeah, we did some of that.
And
Yeah.
we contributed. We started it 25 years ago, which I contributed to. So again, I thought it was the right thing to do.
Mhm.
Not everybody does that.
But again, the money's got to be there to do it. So,
And it came from somewhere else. It came from going into my pocket and Joe's
well,
pocket.
sure, you had a choice of keeping it or giving those
Right.
benefits.
And that's
But the money's got to be in your pocket before you can pull it out of your pocket. That's
exactly.
all I'm getting at.
And it, in our case, it was because we kept the business small. We had, at the time, Joe and I were very involved with every single project.
Mhm.
Knew the customer, knew the requirements, and the goal. We weren't always successful 100% of the time, but in the vast majority of cases, um, we ended with happy customers.
Mhm.
That was the goal.
And
Meet the expectation or exceed it.
yeah, for sure. And that's something I think a lot of people don't get. I think if you go into business, you automatically become rich, and far from it.
I would like to. I could challenge that.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
could challenge that. Now, did I make a good living? Yes.
But you worked at it, and I don't mean physical work. You're
I did both.
mentally into it all the time.
No, I was a physical worker as a laborer
Mhm.
because I had zero skills as a concrete finisher, especially in the decorative world.
Mhm.
And we did a lot of different aspects and worked for very discerning customers.
Mhm.
Nestle, Procter and Gamble, the United States Air Force, the United States government, whether it was at a VA or the federal building but then we also did lots of smaller projects for homeowners.
Mhm.
And so, but every project, you still have the same objective of making somebody happy.
And
And it's hard to do.
I think this is true maybe of whether it's a big business or a little business. You live and die on your reputation.
It's all we had.
Yeah. If you develop a reputation for not doing good work, not doing it on time, uh, you don't get recommended.
In the
And you have to lower your prices to get the jobs. If you are highly recommended, you can raise your prices and pay for people's health insurance and so forth.
well,
Yeah.
we were always considered. We would always be competitive, but we were also a price leader. We never sold on price.
Yeah.
And I had people ask me to compete, and I'd say, "Well, we'll compete to a certain point, but no."
Yeah,
The
yeah.
answer is no.
But you have to be good to be able to get away with that.
Yes.
If you're average, you can only charge it.
I knew
Yeah.
I knew that because of the people that were in my circle,
Mhm.
our core guys, Joe and I, that there was virtually no if we took the project, we knew without fail that we would complete it. Now, trust me, there were times we took a project for Nestle in outside of Indianapolis. They were closing half a dozen plants, and they were building this behemoth plant, absolutely behemoth. I don't know, 15 acres under roof,
Hmm.
just a huge facility. And we were doing executive offices. They had a store. They had a dining facility. We're doing this specialty finish, and it was brutal. Absolutely. You still say the word Nestle to the guys, and they're like, they cringe.
They'll never eat chocolate again.
They cringe because it was everything we did. Everything we did, there were roadblocks to success in it, and it was hard. It was probably the hardest project we ever had, and it was large. And if we had failed at it, it could possibly take the company down.
Yeah. Well,
Because
that's
we're
another.
in it for hundreds of thousands of dollars, and
Yeah.
if we fail, these people don't care, about your problems. All they care about is schedule, and it gets done correctly, and the owner is satisfied.
Yeah.
Beyond that,
Yeah. Oh, I can name any number of well-established businesses larger than either yours or mine. One guy made one mistake, and it just happened to be the wrong mistake, and it destroys the business.
it can
Well,
easily,
yeah,
easily. And I knew that, and
yeah.
but then again, I had a partner like me. We had the values to never accept failure. And we're going to do whatever we have to do personally and professionally to get it done. And we did. And,
Mhm.
it was never, we never did we didn't do finger pointing, like, why are we here? Or, we should have taken this job. But sometimes you hear the guys
If
say that,
your
but you're in it, you're in it.
your mental attitude has to be, it's the job. Get the job done right. If your mental attitude is, well, what about me? You're already
Oh,
screwed.
no, no,
Yeah,
no.
yeah.
That's one thing. That's where we had the core, our inner cores that was our guiding principle. We were not going to fail.
Mhm.
But let me tell you, it was awfully close.
Mhm.
Awfully close. Going back, we talked about Walmart. When you work for these large companies and you're a small contractor, okay, they don't care about you and your company. All they care is that they hired you, you better get the project done. Period. On time, period.
Yep.
A lot of times when you go into these things, you have to sign contracts and you have to have a performance bond.
Mhm.
Okay. That means I have to buy an insurance policy to prove to the owner that I will get the job done on time. And if we don't perform, they're going to hit the button and they're going to demand that we reimburse them for the project. And that comes out of the insurance policy. It's very expensive to do that.
Mhm.
So we were on a project somewhere in northern Ohio for Walmart. It's a brand new store. So you're looking at, yeah, stores are probably $10 million, $15 million projects, land acquisition and all that stuff. We're working for the general contractor, okay? And you could tell where there's a problem on the
Oh yeah.
project. All right,
Yeah.
it's very evident. And we had finished our project, and we didn't get paid. I'm like, this isn't right. After 30 days, usually, and again, with a small contractor, when you get payment is also very difficult because
Mhm.
you sign a contract that says they'll pay you
When they get paid.
when they get paid
Yeah.
within 7 days.
Yeah.
So if they don't get paid, we don't get paid.
Yeah.
Right. So we may be 60 days out and have 15, $20,000 out in labor and materials, and we get nothing.
Yep.
So we get a phone call from the bonding company. So the insurance company calls us and said there's a problem, and the contractor has been removed from the job. That's a big deal.
Yeah.
And this contractor was based in Lexington. And I knew these guys because we had worked for them on several other projects. And something went wrong on the job, way out of our pay grade. We didn't get paid. But because there's a bond, I know, and Joe knew that, we may have to wait another 60 days. But we got a check from the insurance company. That means the general contractor was taken out in the back, and whatever Walmart decides to do with them, they're gone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. But it impacted us because, our materials have to be paid for, our labor has to be paid for, not in 60 or 90 or
Yeah.
120
Yeah.
days. And the bigger the company that you work for, the bigger the organization, the longer it takes to get paid.
Yeah.
People don't know that.
Yeah. I just want to throw this in there because I don't want to name names, Ford Motor Company, but I had a customer at the Woodies and all that. And he was into the Woodies. He was in California, but I had cars coming from all over. We got to know each other a bit because just like you and I, you're in business and talking about stuff.
And we were neighbors.
He was a metal fabricator and he makes specialty stuff for Ford. So when you get the trim package for an SUV that has fancy doodads on it, Ford didn't make all that stuff. They bought it in from people like him. And he was pretty successful, and I knew then, and I know it better now. He had all his eggs in one basket. If Ford screwed him, he was screwed. He didn't have other customers to an extent that would do him any good. And boy, do I remember. He's told me he had to come get the car or something. It wasn't done or something. I said, and he paid me. I mean, he didn't owe me anything, but he said, "This is the end of the line for me." I said, "What happened?" He said, "Well, they decided they didn't need me anymore." And he said, "Well, to them," he said to Ford, "Well, that's fair enough. Just pay me what you owe me." And they said, "Why should we pay you if we don't need you anymore?" They just cut them off,
Wow.
owing them hundreds of thousands of dollars. You can threaten to sue. You'll spend $200,000 to get
That
$100,000. You know,
that's
yeah,
exact.
yeah,
Yeah, suing doesn't help, and everybody knows this. The only
yeah,
ones that gets rich in a
yeah,
lawsuit are the lawyers.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Anytime you cross that bridge, it's
yeah, yeah.
you're
So
throwing money away.
it is more than, and I've always said it's more than what contract you signed. It's who are you dealing with, because the wrong people will screw you over. And it doesn't matter what the contract says.
Pretty much, but again, our path to success was to manage every single project so it didn't get to that point. And
Well, yeah, yeah.
if we saw a
But you were
problem,
dealing with professionals because mostly it's all good, capable professionals. I'm sure you have, and I can say that if I really thought about it over, what was I, close to 40 years in business, if I thought about it, I could come up with 3 or 4 people who were incompetent in their job that I was dealing with, project superintendent or project manager.
we dealt with a lot of that
So
because because of
yeah.
bigger companies hire really young. Not that they're not
Well,
going to
maybe
get there.
that's it. Yeah, but
Really young and
yeah,
experienced people to run these very large projects that have lots of. It's like taking an electric cord and cutting it and having a live wire.
yeah, yeah.
You've got so many things to worry about, and the
But
small and
that
young
was
guys don't have
one of the
that
things
skill.
struck fear in my heart. Is I realized I'm working on a job where somebody there's not up to it, and I have to work around them or through them or something, and that's not a comfortable
See,
feeling.
and you mentioned earlier having a guy, with a high school education that's out there. I have a lot of friends of mine that have high school educations and have become very successful because they have the ability to see through the
Yeah,
trees and
forest for the trees, forest and the trees, whichever you need to see, you have to be able to see
right.
it.
And in my case, um, my partner, I had a college education, fine. Um, Joe had a high school education, fine. He was way further ahead at being able to take a job from a piece of paper to completion.
Hmm.
Okay, from the on the doing side,
Yeah,
getting that project done.
yeah,
And I tip my hat to these men and women that can do this
mhm.
because when you get onto a job, a lot of times when we would go onto a project, we were relying on the guy that was there before us to get his project,
Oh yeah, you're
their
all
project
counting on
done.
each other. Absolutely.
Okay, and we'd
Yeah.
get there and like half the time, sorry, Chip,
No, you broke it. No. Okay.
wouldn't be the first time. But yeah, to get out there and we would have to, we meaning my guys, because I didn't know enough about the intricacies of the project,
Mhm.
at the street level, and they would have to make up for all the mistakes made by the guys that were there before. It happened time
Oh
and
yes. Oh
time
yes. Oh
and
yes.
time again.
Yeah.
And Chad's going through that right now on a project where he has to, you know, people aren't there that are doing their job, and
Mhm.
on a $4 or $5 million home.
So the higher your level of schooling, the greater your success is likely to be, right? Don't count on it. When it comes down to it, it's not so much about how much education you've got. It's about how much can you do? How much of a commitment will you make? How much responsibility will you take on? That is the primary factor in deciding anyone's success. Stay tuned for part 3 of Conversations with Real People named Ken.